Hey guys, tonight we are going to uncover a historical secret, a dark story hidden behind the glorious facade of the famous Virgin Queen. You think you know everything about Elizabeth I, the great queen who brought England to its golden age and defeated the renowned Spanish Armada? Get ready for a shocking truth, because 5 terrifying rules of Queen Elizabeth will haunt you. This isn't a story about a legendary queen. It's the story of a control freak who imprisoned even her closest courtiers, of a person so obsessed with her image that every portrait had to follow a single template. Elizabeth I turned her court into a psychological prison where love was a crime and perfection was an absolute requirement. So, before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's start tonight's journey together. Before delving into the 5 horrifying rules that turned Elizabeth I's reign into a terror among European courts, we must first understand the psychological baggage and background circumstances that shaped her. The upheavals of her youth, from the grand baptism she received at birth, to the collapse of her status as a princess when her mother was executed, and on to the self-disciplined pursuit of knowledge under the finest tutors in England, laid the foundation for Elizabeth's resolute, shrewd, and uncompromising character. By grasping the root of her early traumas and the hidden well of strength they produced, we can more readily see why, when she ascended the throne, she imposed such draconian measures of control. Next, let us explore in detail the family, childhood, and educational journey that forged one of the most powerful queens in England's history. Queen Elizabeth I, Elizabeth Tudor, was born on the 7th of September in 1533 at the Palace of Placentia in Greenwich, London. She was the only surviving daughter among the 6 children of King Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn. Before her birth, Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon had been annulled, causing Mary Tudor, Catherine's daughter, to be removed from the line of succession and making Elizabeth heir to the throne. On the 10th of September in 1533, just 3 days after her birth, Elizabeth was baptized in a solemn ceremony, with Archbishop Thomas Cranmer and many high-ranking courtiers serving as godparents. From her earliest years, Elizabeth endured profound psychological upheavals. In May of 1536, when she was only 2.5, her mother Anne Boleyn was charged with treason and executed. That event not only robbed Elizabeth of her mother, but also led to her being declared illegitimate and stripped of her succession rights for several years. Afterwards, Henry married Jane Seymour and fathered Edward, forcing Elizabeth to live as a disgraced princess, no longer enjoying her former status. However, this period of sidelining opened the door for Elizabeth to devote herself fully to her education under the care of her governess, Catherine "Cat" Ashley, who remained her companion for more than 20 years. From the age of 4, Elizabeth began studying English, Latin, and French. By the age of 12, she was fluent in all 3 languages and was entrusted with translating her stepmother, Catherine Parr's prayers or meditations from English into Latin, French, and Italian. Simultaneously, she pursued study of Greek, Spanish, and Dutch under esteemed tutors such as William Grindal and Roger Ascham. Her linguistic aptitude and passion for reading laid the solid foundation for her sharp intellect and flexible leadership style in later life. Elizabeth belonged to the Tudor dynasty, a relatively new royal house established after Henry VII ended the Wars of the Roses. Her father, Henry VIII, became notorious for bending ecclesiastical authority to annul his marriage to Catherine and wed Anne, then restructuring the Church of England. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, was a shrewd but controversial figure, ultimately falling from favour and facing execution. Elizabeth's half-siblings Mary I, a devout Catholic, and Edward VI, a Protestant reformer, each ruled before her. Their reigns, from Mary's Catholic restoration to Edward's Protestant reforms, taught Elizabeth to balance power between traditional and reformist factions. Elizabeth's adolescence was further shaped by a complex relationship with her uncle Thomas Seymour, who took charge of her care after Henry's death. Rumours of Seymour's overly familiar behaviour frightened Elizabeth and instilled in her a strong sense of caution and self-reliance from an early age. Many historians argue that this experience sowed the seeds of her fear of power's abuse and forged her resilient defensive instincts. Upon her accession on the 15th of January in 1559, at the age of 25, Elizabeth declared, "I will marry no man in this life, for I have already an husband. That is the realm of England." With this deft statement, she emphasized the unique bond between monarch and nation. Immediately after her coronation, she enacted the Elizabethan religious settlement, re-establishing the independence of the Church of England from Rome, while seeking a compromise between Catholics and Protestants. This policy ushered in domestic stability and laid the groundwork for the Elizabethan Golden Age. Under Elizabeth's rule, English culture and the arts flourished brilliantly. Poetry, drama, and court architecture blossomed, with William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe leaving an enduring legacy. The Queen became a great patron of the arts, commissioning numerous plays, musical performances, and grand architectural projects. In foreign policy, Elizabeth skillfully maintained peace with European powers during the early decades of her reign. In 1588, she witnessed the resounding defeat of the Spanish Armada, affirming England's naval supremacy and safeguarding its independence. This victory became a symbol of the nation's indomitable spirit and military strength. In her later years, Elizabeth faced multiple crises at home and abroad: economic hardship, famine, plague, and mounting pressure to name an heir. Nonetheless, she resolutely retained power, refusing to designate a successor until her final moments. On the 23rd of March in 1592, Elizabeth died at the age of 58, concluding a 40-year reign that saw no civil war and securing her place as one of England's most celebrated monarchs. In summary, from her birth into a turbulent royal family, through a childhood marked by dramatic upheaval, to her outstanding education and diplomatic acumen, Elizabeth I emerged as a model of a great queen. She balanced opposing factions and left a flourishing cultural and political legacy. Understanding her family background, childhood experiences, and educational journey is key to grasping the origins of the 5 terrifying rules she later enforced, which made her reign one of the most powerful and dramatic periods in European history. The first frightening rule: marriage as a crime. First, let us lean back, relax our shoulders, and listen to the first terrifying rule that Queen Elizabeth I established, transforming marriage into the most heinous crime. She not only chose a life of perpetual spinsterhood for herself, but also absolutely forbade any marriage within the court, turning the sincere longing for love into a dream that must be paid for dearly with freedom and honor. Throughout her childhood, Elizabeth was haunted by the traumatic memory of witnessing her stepmother, Anne Boleyn, executed by the axe. That scene left an indelible psychological scar, leading her to believe that marriage was the grave of happiness and its most ruthless enemy. From that moment on, the Virgin Queen decreed, marriage was not merely a personal choice, but a tool to control and dominate every relationship in her realm. Upon ascending the throne, Elizabeth issued an edict forbidding any nobleman or noblewoman in her court to marry without her written permission. Anyone who dared flout this prohibition was deemed a traitor, stripped of all titles and privileges, and even condemned to imprisonment. Her handling of offender, Bess Throckmorton, a once beloved lady-in-waiting, stands as vivid proof of the brutality of this rule. Bess Throckmorton, one of Elizabeth's most trusted attendants, secretly wed the explorer Walter Raleigh. News of their union enraged Elizabeth. She not only stripped Bess of her position, but ordered that both newlyweds be confined to the Tower of London. In that dark, freezing chamber, with rats and vermin lurking in every corner, the pregnant Bess endured severe deprivation, no sunlight, no adequate provisions, merely to demonstrate the Queen's unshakable power and demand for absolute loyalty. For many months, Bess suffered through bitterly cold nights and the hushed whispers of her jailers. She did not know if she would live to see the next dawn, nor if she would ever taste freedom again, nor if her unborn child would survive alongside her. Every breath became laboured. Every dream of family happiness quietly died within the prison's shadow. At last, when Elizabeth finally permitted her release, Bess emerged a broken shell, her honour destroyed, her status permanently revoked, and banned forever from the court. In stark contrast, Walter Raleigh, her husband, after a period of silence, gradually regained royal favour and became a cherished courtier. This disparity cut even deeper into Bess's wounds, turning love into a capital offence and loyalty into a burden paid at the highest price. The fate of Bess Throckmorton was no isolated incident but a harsh lesson for all nobles. Elizabeth's court became a community gripped by the terror of marriage, where even a single look of genuine affection risked arrest. Relationships between men and women ceased to be natural bonds and became subjects of intense scrutiny. The fear of being discovered as partners forced nobles to maintain a frosty distance, often masking their true feelings behind a veneer of courtesy while silently pleading, "Do not let any emotion show." Marriage, once regarded as the sacred ground of happiness, in Elizabeth's palace became a death sentence. Every ring exchanged was a potential hazard. Every vow sworn, a cause for vengeance. Instead of blessing unions, Elizabeth turned wedding ceremonies into trials. Instead of celebrating love, she wielded it as a tool to reinforce her supreme authority. Thus, the court became a collective nightmare, where every beating heart trembled under the Queen's decree. With this first frightening rule, Elizabeth I deftly transformed love and marriage into instruments of soft power under her command, ensuring that anyone bold or foolish enough to pursue them paid the cost in freedom and honor. From now on, every turn in courtly life, from a tender glance to a shared smile, harbored risk. A single misstep meant not only the loss of love, but possibly the permanent loss of one's place in the world. Thus, we have witnessed the first horrifying portrait: marriage as a crime. In the stillness of night, where all tranquility dissolves and only the echo of lost liberty remains, one truly grasps the cruelty of this rule. Disgusting rule number 2. Absolute control of the Queen's image and portrait. Let us settle in, draw the duvet a little higher, and drift into the soft thrum of a tale as chilling as a midnight breeze. This is the second of our horrifying mandates. Queen Elizabeth I did not merely sit upon her throne, she claimed sovereignty over every brushstroke that captured her likeness. From the year 1562, when smallpox ravaged her face and left deep, unyielding scars, Elizabeth embarked upon a campaign to seize total dominion over her own appearance. In the Tudor age, a monarch's visage was not mere vanity, it was divine testimony of God's favour. Hence, any hint of imperfection, any pockmark or line, threatened to shatter the sacred image she had so painstakingly constructed. Rather than accepting the truth of her wounded reflection, Elizabeth devised what she called the face pattern, a meticulously detailed blueprint of her facial features, proportions of forehead and cheek, the exact curve of her nose, the precise arch of her brows, the soft fullness of her lips approved by the Queen herself, and supplied to every court artist across the realm. Any painter who dared deviate from this template, however slightly if they showed one faint scar or whispered line, was branded a rebel and subjected to severe punishment. Portrait after portrait emerged, indistinguishable from one another, like factory-produced icons stamped with the seal of perfection. Through this ruthless standardization, Elizabeth ensured her visage remained immortal and unblemished in the eyes of her subjects. Yet the face pattern was only the beginning. The Queen extended this aesthetic tyranny throughout her court, enforcing her own beauty regimen upon all ladies of noble birth. Every gentlewoman was expected to emulate Elizabeth's flawless countenance. Rigorous skin treatments to smooth away any hint of freckle or flaw, layers upon layers of white powder to mask the reality beneath, and elaborate wig constructions to replicate her own flowing red hair. Refusal or failure to conform branded one as disloyal, an accessory of disgrace. The palace corridors resonated with the quiet rustle of silken dresses and the faint click of hairpins as each courtier strove to remain within the royal visual order, lest they be cast out as passé or faithless. Beneath this campaign lay a deeper terror, the Queen's own fear of exposure. The night she witnessed her stepmother's brutal execution etched a lasting dread of vulnerability into her soul. Power, she came to believe, was fragile, and any sign of weakness risked toppling her reign. Thus, the scars she bore were branded as traitors, to be erased at any cost. Any departure from the sanctioned portrait condemned as an act of sedition. In this way, Elizabeth's outward perfection became both armour and prison, an impenetrable facade, shielding a psyche wounded by loss, yet demanding relentless upkeep to conceal its hidden fractures. The toll of this mandate extended far beyond paint and canvas. Artists lived in constant dread, their brushes trembling at the slightest slip. They worked under the watchful gaze of palace officials, who measured each stroke with critical eyes. Reprisals for perceived imperfections ranged from loss of royal commissions, effectively exile from prestige, to sentences in the tower itself. Even the mere suggestion of stray marks in a sketchbook could spark official inquiry, and careers were ruined on the basis of a misplaced shadow or an unintended wrinkle. Court life transformed into a silent theatre of compliance. In morning's pale light, the Queen's ladies would be summoned to her dressing chamber, where Elizabeth's own makeup ritual served as both spectacle and warning. She would apply layers of lead-based ceruse, her skin gleaming chalk white, her hair hidden beneath wigs designed to conceal thinning patches. The lead, of course, slowly poisoned her flesh, but Elizabeth endured the pain to maintain the illusion of eternal youth. Spectators watched in hushed fascination, internalizing the message. Beauty was power, and deviation from the royal standard was nothing less than treason. This visual absolutism shaped public perceptions as well. Foreign dignitaries, upon gazing at the identical portraits sent to continental courts, believed in the Queen's flawless visage, unaware of the hidden horrors beneath the powder. Diplomats carried these images back to their own monarchs, spreading the myth of Elizabeth's divine unaging beauty. Behind the scenes, however, the Queen's artisans toiled in secrecy, painting over layers of canvas as they erased fresh scars, perpetuating the cycle of concealment. Now, let us recline ever deeper into our pillows, drawing the soft folds of imagination around us, and glean the second horrid decree's darker half. This is disgusting rule number 2 continued. The endless cycle of self-destruction born of lead-based makeup. Having already imposed her face pattern on every court artist, Elizabeth I resolved to obliterate every visible trace of her smallpox scars with a daily application of Venetian ceruse, a deadly concoction of lead powder and vinegar. Each morning, before dawn's first pale light touched the palace walls, Elizabeth's chamber would stir with the quiet hum of attendants preparing her poison-white paste. The mixture, crushingly thick, held lead in concentrations so extreme that chronic intoxication was unavoidable. Once applied across her face, neck, and hands in smooth, unbroken layers, the ceruse gave her the illusion of ageless porcelain skin. Yet beneath that mask, lead seeped through her flesh, eating away at tissues, causing relentless inflammation, and triggering the loss of eyelashes and eyebrows. Over months and years, the poison crept inward, gnawing at her nervous system, leaving faint tremors in her limbs and headaches that only grew more persistent. In the haze of candlelit mirrors, Elizabeth beheld a self she had engineered a flawless, deathly pallor, but at the cost of her own body. Each fissure of diseased skin produced by the lead's erosion required yet more paste to conceal. Thus began the vicious feedback loop. Lead corroded her flesh, creating new blemishes. She smoothed them over with more lead. New damage emerged. She smothered it again. Day by day, the cycle accelerated, deepening the scars and compounding her need for ever thicker layers of toxic makeup. Despite the ravages inflicted on her health-tired eyes, rimmed in lead-induced dermatitis, thinning hair, and pallid, taut skin, Elizabeth refused to relent. She clung to the illusion of herself as the immortal queen, for whom growth lines or pockmarks would signify weakness and imperil her divine authority. In her mind's ear echoed the cruel lesson of her childhood. Any sign of vulnerability could be exploited by her enemies. She chose, then, to pay the highest price, even if it cost her body or mind, rather than permit a single imperfection to mar her reign. But this brutal regime extended far beyond the Queen's own visage. She inspired fear and imitation among her ladies of the court, transforming the royal dressing chamber into what might be called a gentle poisoning laboratory. Noble women and gentlewomen alike were required to adopt the same lead-white aesthetic. Each morning they lined up to have their faces and hands coated with the same Venetian ceruse mixture, transformed into living mannequins, their skin drained of warmth and colour. Their natural hairlines were concealed beneath elaborate wigs dyed to match the Queen's own fiery red locks, creating a procession of ghostly figures gliding through the corridors. Failure to conform if a lady refused or faltered in her application was tantamount to treason against the visual order Elizabeth had established. Such a lapse could mean the loss of her courtly station, social ostracism, or even imprisonment in the very same tower where Bess Throckmorton had languished. Whispered gossip echoed through the corridors, a constant reminder that loyalty now meant compliance with the Queen's lethal beauty regimen. Psychologically, This deadly cycle stemmed from Elizabeth's deep-seated fear of revelation. The image of her beloved stepmother's fall under the executioner's blade had taught her that power was fleeting and that a single misstep could lead to ruin. She had, in effect, baptized herself anew each dawn, burying her scars beneath layers of lead so that none might glimpse the fragile humanity beneath. In doing so, she weaponized beauty itself, turning self-preservation into a ritual of self-annihilation. Outside the palace walls, this cosmetic terror bolstered Elizabeth's myth as an ageless sovereign. Ambassadors and foreign dignitaries received portraits that spoke of an untarnished goddess, unaware that each perfect cheek was a layering of deceit. The myth spread across courts from Paris to Prague, perpetuating the illusion of her eternal youth and masking the toll exacted by the lead's poison. Meanwhile, her personal physicians recorded mysterious ailments, severe anemia, brittle bones, and cognitive lapses, symptoms of chronic lead poisoning, though none dared attribute them to her daily poison ritual. In the quiet hush of night, when the palace gates closed and the last chandelier flickered out, the Queen's beauty chamber lay strewn with empty vials and lead-caked brushes. Servants whispered among themselves of the cruelty inherent in each dollop of white paste. Despite the laughter and courtly pageantry by day, the shadows of the Queen's self-destroying habit reached into every corner of the realm. Ordinary subjects, hearing tales of her ritual, trembled at the thought that beauty might demand such sacrifice and that their sovereign would impose such loyalties upon them. The vicious cycle of toxic makeup did not only imprison Elizabeth in physical suffering, it spread through the entire court, transforming it into a diorama of deadly beauty. Each dawn, when the first fragile rays of sunrise lifted the velvet drapes, nobles, gentlewomen, even the guards and sentries, must line up neatly before the Queen's makeup chamber. They bore upon their skin the standard of chalk-white flawless complexions decreed by Her Majesty, regardless of the lethal consequences of the lead powder. Hair, once a symbol of vitality and youthful bloom, shared the same tragic fate. Lead-corroded hair follicles, rendering Elizabeth's own hair thinning and brittle like autumn leaves, falling away in clumps. To conceal this depletion, everyone at court raced to don wigs from striking red ones, echoing the Queen's natural hue, to elaborate headdresses padded with cloth and woven with metal frames to add volume, height, and a veneer of grandeur. From any vantage, the palace resembled a silent forest of white wax figures, each head a hollow, artfully constructed sculpture. Should anyone violate the standard merely by allowing rough skin to show, glimpsing one's own thinning strands in a mirror, or accidentally smudging one's rouge while bowing to the Queen, they were branded a rebel against her aesthetic order. Punishments extended beyond loss of title, exile from court, or public disgrace. They could escalate to imprisonment. One lady almost lost her freedom for revealing a cluster of red pimples, and another gentlewoman stood trial before the Court of Honor for lips inadequately defined. The dread of being discovered grew so overwhelming that no one dared laugh aloud. No one dared move with too much vigor for fear of disturbing their powder, and every glance from the councillors to the chambermaids could serve as evidence of aesthetic treason. In the silence of night, long after the candles had guttered out, the echoes of the make-up ritual lingered in the minds of those who survived. They would whisper of trembling hands dipping brushes, of flesh numb with absorbed lead, and of eyes too weary to recognize their own reflection. They persevered only to preserve their honor and position, for beauty had become not a privilege but an obligatory duty. Indeed, Elizabeth's palace had become the stage for a compulsory beauty pageant, where anyone failing to meet the collective ideal risked severe punishment. The surveillance was ruthless. Gentlewoman reporting gentlewoman, guard watching gentlewoman, every hushed whisper in the royal apartments, a potential trigger for a harsh decree. Each day, they fought not only the lead powder, but also the relentless fear of falling short of the Queen's standard, of losing their place of safety, of being forgotten altogether. In conclusion, the second rule, absolute image control, was not merely a political tactic, but a psychological weapon, poisoning the court from within. In that environment, beauty and terror were inseparable, reaffirming Elizabeth's supreme authority. She was the author, director, and final arbiter of all that was deemed beautiful, and no one dared to question or misstep before her invisible yet all-encompassing apparatus of oversight. In the hush of slumber, when the sound of waves upon the Thames recedes into distant memory, only then can one truly grasp the cruelty of this beauty diorama. Beneath layers of thick white powder, the palace stood as a softly orchestrated tableau of death, where splendor was purchased at the cost of freedom, health, and even the soul. Disgusting rule number 3. Love requires royal permission. Now, let your eyelids grow heavy and drift as we explore the first part of the third dreadful decree Elizabeth I imposed upon her court. The absolute requirement that all love, even the faintest flutter of the heart, must bear the Queen's written blessing. She did not stop at forbidding marriage. She transformed every innocent glance and gentle murmur into an act of defiance. In her realm, the tender stirrings of affection were deemed crimes against the crown, punishable by disgrace, exile, or worse. Imagine the hush of castle corridors at dawn, when dew still clings to the tapestries, and noble ladies dare not share a private word with a gentleman without first presenting a petition to the Queen's scribes. Secret conversations required royal seals. Clandestine letters demanded approval from the secretary's office. At every turn, spies agents of Elizabeth's design slipped unseen among the courtiers, recording stolen glances and overheard declarations, then hastening to whisper every detail into the Queen's waiting ear. Thus the entire court became an intricate neck collar of surveillance, as tight and unforgiving as iron, where a fleeting look or a hushed compliment could be twisted into an offence of the highest order. But Elizabeth did more than suppress true affection. She wielded love itself as a form of entertainment, her own personal theatre of seduction and punishment. She encouraged casual flirtations and whispered banter, sowing seeds of attraction among her ladies in waiting and suitors, only to detach herself and watch as emotions bloomed into full-scale scandal. In this cruel game, the Queen served as both ringmaster and executioner. She beckoned the players with coy smiles, then struck with icy wrath when their affections deepened beyond mere amusement. Love was transformed into bait, and the courtiers became her unwilling labrats, their hearts tested and exposed to the cold glare of royal scrutiny. No letter of affection could pass the palace gates without first being opened, censored, and annotated by Elizabeth's censors. Every appointment in a rose garden or shaded gallery required a formal permit, signed and witnessed. Every lingering touch upon the hand, every stolen kiss hidden beneath a fan, was logged and analysed. The court ceased to be a place where genuine bonds might form. Instead, it became a stage, meticulously directed by the Queen herself. She issued the cues, observed the unfolding drama, and judged the performers, meting out rewards of favour or sentences of banishment based on the depth of their sincerity. Such a virtual reality of courtship created a suffocating tension. Ladies in waiting lived perpetually on edge, uncertain which shared smile or friendly word might tomorrow lead to their undoing. Psychological strain ran rampant. Some young nobles broke down in tears when their amorous letters were confiscated. Others descended into outright panic at the thought of being labelled traitors to the Queen's decree. In extreme cases, the relentless scrutiny led to complete mental collapse, their minds unable to withstand the ever-watchful eyes and ears arrayed against them. Over time, this system of romantic surveillance eroded the bonds of friendship and trust that once held the court together. Sister turned against sister, servant against mistress, all eager to curry the Queen's favour by exposing any hint of forbidden sentiment. Intimate confidences vanished, replaced by suspicion and suspicion alone. The very concept of a secret, whispered confession was rendered obsolete, for any secret might become a weapon. And so, in this first half of our third horrifying rule, we see how Elizabeth I elevated love to a weapon of social engineering. By demanding royal permission for every heartbeat and sigh, she ensured that no heart could beat freely, no soul could soar unchained. Each longing glance was a potential offence, each tender word a cause for royal reprimand. The court did not merely imprison bodies within palace walls. It caged hearts and minds, forging a generation of nobles whose affections trembled under the weight of the crown's relentless gaze. In the hush of candlelit halls, when the courtiers finally dare to close their weary eyes, they still carry the echo of the Queen's decree. That love, in its purest form, is subject to the sovereign's will. And so, nestled in the twilight of their dreams, they glimpse the true horror of rule number 3, where the most innocent human impulse becomes the darkest of transgressions. Let us drift further into the somnolent hush, as we recount the next harrowing episode of Elizabeth I's love surveillance. The notorious case of Lettice Knollys and Robert Dudley. This grim tale illuminates the Queen's merciless stance on romantic entanglements, revealing how swiftly affection could transform into a capital offence. In the year 1578, Lettice Knollys, once a favoured gentlewoman of the court, entangled her fate with that of Robert Dudley, Elizabeth's closest confidant and favourite. Their courtship, conducted in secret whispers and stolen glances, blossomed into furtive marriage. When word reached the Queen, she was said to have erupted in a fury unmatched even by those who had defied her will. To Elizabeth, Lettice's union was not merely treason against her heart, but treason against her crown. Without hesitation, the Queen issued a decree of banishment. Lettice was forbidden ever to set foot in the royal court again. Stripped of her titles and honours, she was cast into exiled oblivion, her name stricken from the rolls of nobility. The court that once marvelled at her wit and beauty now turned its back, consigning her to a lonely limbo. When Lettice later crossed paths with her former mistress, perhaps by chance, perhaps by cruel design, Elizabeth chose to mete out her censure in the most public of manners. Before assembled courtiers and visiting dignitaries, the Queen struck Lettice a blow across the cheek, a stinging rebuke engraved upon her very flesh. This slap echoed through the corridors like a death knell. It was no mere act of jealousy, but a calculated warning. Love within these walls was not an innocent feeling, but a crime of the highest order. The message was as clear as it was chilling. Any heart that dared to stray beyond the Queen's gaze risked ruin. Lettice lost not only her marriage, but her honour and her place at the core of power. The wound ran deeper than flesh. It fractured her mind and her social standing, condemning her to endure the shame of public scorn. Robert Dudley, for his part, endured his own torment. Though eventually partially restored to favour, he became a ghost of the man he once was, forever shadowed by suspicion and bound to prove his loyalty anew each day. He navigated court life like a man treading on ice, aware that a single misstep could plunge him back into disgrace. His every gesture was scrutinised, every word weighed for hidden meanings. In this way, Elizabeth ensured that the wound inflicted upon Lettice reverberated through the court's entire hierarchy. Through this cruel spectacle, the Queen revealed the depths of her psychological game. She permitted flirtations and the gentle exchange of compliments, sowing seeds of intrigue and amusement. Yet, when emotions hardened into genuine attachment, she unleashed her fury with blinding speed. Love became her experimental laboratory, where unsuspecting participants were baited into entanglement, only to be torn apart when their affections proved more than mere play. The court, once a stage for political manoeuvring, became a battlefield of emotions. Factions formed not along lines of policy or creed, but along the invisible fault lines of the heart. Courtiers weighed alliances in terms of romantic advantage, viewing friendships as potential conspiracies. Lettice's disgrace sent ripples of paranoia through the noble families. Who might next be accused of harbouring unsanctioned love? Which innocent glance could spark the Queen's wrath? The psychological toll was profound. Gentlewomen lived in a state of constant anxiety, fearing that an accidental touch upon a hand or a moment's shared smile might be recorded by the eyes of spies. Several ladies succumbed to despair, their spirits crushed under the relentless pressure. Some retreated from court altogether, their devotion eroded by the knowledge that true affection was perilous. Others found themselves on the brink of madness, their minds unravelling under the weight of suspicion. As dawn broke each day, the survivors gathered their strength to once again perform the dance of obedience. They donned their masks of courtesy and pressed their faces into the Queen's prescribed patterns, all the while glancing over their shoulders for signs of betrayal. The rule that love requires royal permission elevated affection from a natural human impulse to a lethal hazard. In this pervasive atmosphere, trust vanished. Sisters once bound by shared confidences schooled their expressions to neutrality, lest a fleeting grimace betray them to the Queen's agents. Brothers plotted alliances based on the whispers of courtiers, forever alert to the threat of romantic intrigue. The very concept of privacy dissolved. Napoleon's armies and Roman legions may have marched across continents, but in Elizabeth I England, it was the heart that lay under siege. And so, with the punishment of Lettice Knollys and Robert Dudley, we see the full horror of rule number 3. the transformation of love into a weaponized spectacle. This was not governance by law alone, but governance by emotional terror. As night falls over the Thames and the palace gates close, the echo of a single slap lingers, a reminder that in Elizabeth's court, the greatest betrayals were not plotted in secret chambers, but whispered between two beating hearts. Disgusting rule number 4, religion is non-negotiable. Let your eyelids flutter as we drift into the next chapter of Elizabeth I's realm, where faith itself became a tool of tyranny. This is the first half of disgusting rule number 4. The Queen's decree that religion was not a matter of personal conscience, but an uncompromising mandate of the state. In her dual role as sovereign and supreme head of the Church of England, Elizabeth claimed authority over both crown and creed. She styled herself supreme governor of her newly fashioned church, demanding that every subject observe the rites and dogmas she prescribed. Private belief was overlooked, but public deviation was deemed high treason. Absence from the parish church on a Sunday, failure to kneel at the prescribed moment, or reciting a psalm at the wrong pitch could lead to charges that echoed with the clang of shackles. Elizabeth's religious settlement was draped in the language of moderation, yet its enforcement proved brutal. Those steadfast in their Roman Catholic faith, refusing to bow to her new ecclesiastical order, found themselves on the receiving end of crushing fines. Wealthy landowners faced penalties so severe that entire family estates vanished, swallowed by the crown to end countless lineages in a single stroke. For the Puritans, who sought further reformation rather than return to Rome, punishment arrived in equal measure. Imprisonment in dank cells, physical torture to force recantation, or in the most extreme cases, execution by the hangman's noose. Noble families found their fortunes and reputations shattering under these financial burdens. A single unpaid fine could bankrupt a household, sending children into the care of distant relatives or parish workhouses. Merchants, fearful of association with accused heretics, severed trade ties, further impoverishing entire communities. Entire villages learned to whisper of their heretical neighbours, urgent to show their own piety and avoid the crown's wrath. Elizabeth did not merely wait for voluntary compliance. She orchestrated a sprawling network of religious informants. Neighbours spied on neighbours, gleaning evidence from furtive gatherings in hidden chapels. Servants reported whispers in the hallways, betraying masters in exchange for royal favour or simple immunity from suspicion. Even children, indoctrinated in this culture of fear, were encouraged to denounce their own parents if they suspected participation in banned rites. The very concept of spiritual sanctuary vanished, replaced by an ever-watchful system of betrayal. The Queen's strategy bordered on gaslighting on a grand scale. She insisted she punished only political traitors, even as the true motive lay in eradicating competing beliefs. To the outside world, her proclamations sounded like measured legal actions, yet behind the veil, they served to crush religious dissent. Over 200 devout Catholics were led to execution blocks, their deaths draped in the rhetoric of protecting the realm from treasonous plots, rather than acknowledging their faith as the real offence. In every corner of England, religion ceased to be a balm for the soul and became a straitjacket on the spirit. Attendance at the Anglican service was no longer an act of worship, but a demonstration of obedience. Tithes, once a voluntary donation, were now enforced taxes, funneled directly into the royal coffers to finance further instruments of control. Even prayer, that most personal of acts, was circumscribed by form and formula, lest any spontaneous devotion stray beyond the Queen's narrow line. Imagine, if you will, the hush that fell over a village green on a Sunday morning, as families filed into the parish church in rigid formation. Each congregant bowed in perfect unison, faces downcast, voices merged into a single, carefully monitored chorus. Behind the pulpit, the minister, a man appointed by the crown, delivered sermons laced with warnings. Damned were those who harboured seditious superstition. Blessed were those loyal to the Anglican creed. Outside, crouching in hedgerows or beneath thatched roofs, persecuted Catholics huddled in secret, clutching rosary beads and whispering prayers of defiance. The mental toll of this ever-present religious terror cannot be overstated. Families lived in constant dread of midnight raids by pursuivant royal officers who scoured homes for forbidden books, Latin missals, and clandestine chapels. A single glimpse of a rosary could ignite a raid that uprooted entire households. Mothers wept as their children were hauled off to reformatories. Priests, once respected village leaders, were hunted like criminals. Every knock on the door became a harbinger of doom. Every footstep in the corridor, a promise of betrayal. And yet, Elizabeth held firm. To her mind, the soul of the nation was at stake, and she would not brook any compromise. Her people must not only pay lip service to her church, but must do so visibly and unhesitatingly. Thus, she guaranteed that religion served the monarchy, not the other way around, an unholy inversion that placed the Queen above the Almighty in the hearts and minds of her subjects. In the amber glow of candlelight, when even the most devout whispered their final prayers, they did so under the weight of the Queen's edict. Religion was no longer a private comfort, but a testament to royal power. For those who dared to remember another way, the stakes were nothing less than life itself. Drift with me now into the heavy hush that settled over Elizabeth's realm as her extremist religious policy wreaked a silent havoc upon society. What began as a decree to consolidate power soon unraveled the very fabric of community life, tearing families apart and turning neighbours into informants. Under this rule, relatives betrayed one another in a desperate bid to earn the Queen's favour. Each denunciation hailed as patriotic duty. The parish church, once a sanctuary of shared solace, became an impersonal administrative arm of the crown, its rituals reduced to compulsory ceremonies devoid of genuine worship. Children were enlisted in this climate of suspicion, taught that the highest virtue was loyalty to the throne, even if it meant accusing their own parents of ritual infractions. These youngsters, raised as little spies, patrolled hearth and home, alert for any sign of nonconformity. A whispered prayer in the old tongue, a hidden image of the crucifix, or a refusal to recite the new litany. With every tattletale report, another home was raided, another family splintered, and another layer of trust dissolved into thin air. In the bright glare of daylight, smiles masked anxiety. In the quiet of night, hearts beat with fear of discovery. Even those who shared the Protestant faith but sought further reform, the Puritans, found themselves ensnared by Elizabeth's monolith. Their calls to simplify or intensify the Anglican rites were branded extremist, treasonous, cries for anarchy rather than earnest expressions of faith. Men and women who had once stood shoulder to shoulder at communion tables now cowered in dank prison cells or watched helplessly as their property was seized, their livelihoods evaporated. No cause, however righteous, could escape the Queen's unforgiving wrath. The very notion of religious liberty was crushed beneath her edicts, as uncompromising as the steel gauntlets that defended her throne. Elizabeth's vast network of informants ensured that no pew remained safe. Parishioners attending services under the watchful gaze of local magistrates whispered prayers of caution rather than devotion. Private chapels were shuttered, hidden masses dispersed by armed officers. The shared hush of prayer was replaced by the shuffle of feet and furtive glances, everyone wary that the next witness might be the child kneeling beside them. Under this relentless pressure, countless men and women succumbed to nervous disorders. Insomnia haunted their nights, tremors shook their hands, and some spiraled into madness as the terror of constant surveillance eroded their minds. Remote villages, once sleepy havens of pastoral calm, transformed overnight into prisms of paranoia. Every gesture crossing oneself discreetly, uttering a psalm in Latin, risked a death sentence. The landscape of faith shifted from fertile fields of genuine belief to barren moors of fear, where even a whispered invocation could lead to a spy's report and a knell of doom. In homes now emptied of warmth, survivors walked on edge, haunted by memories of neighbours' curses and the sight of torchlit raids on their doors. In the end, the true monstrosity of this rule lay not only in its legal severity, but in its capacity to poison the human spirit. By subordinating conscience to the crown and weaponizing worship itself, Elizabeth I ensured that religion became less a source of comfort and more a mechanism of terror. The people of her realm no longer knelt in prayer for solace, but stood in trembling obedience to a sovereign who claimed the highest authority over both soul and state. And so concludes disgusting rule number 4. Elizabeth's religious absolutism did more than enforce orthodoxy. It shattered communities, corrupted innocence, and entrenched fear as the new creed of England. In the silent aftermath, one could almost hear the lost echoes of genuine faith, drowned beneath the relentless drumbeat of royal command. Disgusting rule number 5. Weakness is a crime. As the dawn leads us gently into the final of Elizabeth's dreadful edicts, let your lids droop once more and listen to the last decree. No sign of frailty, no hint of age or ailment must mar the Queen's unbroken veneer. For 45 long years, Elizabeth I upheld her self-fashioned image as an immortal goddess, forbidding any admission of fatigue or sickness. Her layers of lead-based makeup grew ever thicker. Her wigs swelled in size and complexity. Her visage became not merely a symbol of power, but a colossal mask concealing a body in slow decay. From the highest lady of the court to the lowliest chambermaid, all were compelled into this performance of perpetual strength. A single whisper of a wrinkle, a strand of silver hair, or the faint blackening and loss of teeth was deemed a reprehensible act proof of horrifying truth about the sovereign herself. Those who spoke too freely of aging features were branded sinners against the royal illusion, punished by banishment from court, loss of rank, or even more severe reprisals. The Palace of Whitehall and Greenwich alike became stages upon which reality was banned, replaced instead by an eternal phantasm of youthful authority. This merciless demand for unending vigour stemmed from Elizabeth's unwillingness to acknowledge her own mortality and from her refusal to name a clear successor. She balked at admitting any weakness, for to do so would invite speculation and political turmoil. Each bout of illness was treated like a state secret, cloistered behind closed doors and muffled whispers. When the Queen fell into fits of coughing or languished through feverish nights, courtiers dared not utter her name, lest they be accused of consorting with the spectre of death itself. Rumours of her frailty spread like wildfire, sending ripples of panic through the realm, yet she continued to deny the very possibility of decline. In the absence of a proclaimed heir, the nation teetered on the brink of chaos each time Elizabeth's health faltered. Town criers whispered of no king and no queen to follow, while merchants and magistrates reserved their deference in fearful anticipation of the next illness. The kingdom yearned for stability, yet the Queen's vanity forbade her from naming a successor until the very instant of her passing. The populace lived in dread of a power vacuum, unable to find solace in the future, for their immortal goddess would not admit she too must someday yield to time. By the end of her reign, Elizabeth was a walking corpse in all but name, a mobile throne adorned with chalk-white paint and piled-high golden wigs. Her face, a cracked porcelain mask, reflected no emotion but the cold calculations of sovereignty. Yet beneath those opaque layers simmered the gnawing reality of tissue degenerated by lead poisoning, of limbs weakened by years of wearing heavy gowns and towering headdresses. Her final audiences, conducted through a lattice of glare and distance, served as stark reminders that weakness is a crime in the kingdom she ruled. Courtiers who once chatted about her brilliance now spoke in hushed tones, wary of any slip of the tongue. A single cough, a faint tremor of the hand, might be seized as evidence of infirmity, and thus as justification for their own advancement or her own humiliation. In this cruel dynamic, the Queen weaponized her body against herself and everyone around her, ensuring that her subjects remained ever on guard, ever vigilant not to reveal the slightest human vulnerability. And what of loyalty under such a regime? It became a fragile thing, flitting like a candle's flame in a draught. Those who clung too tightly to her favor risked stepping into the toxic miasma of her own self-deception. Those who held back suspicioned every cough or weary breath as a sign of disloyalty. The palace echoed with an unsettling hush, as though every heartbeat might betray a weakness punishable by exile or worse, oblivion. In taking frailty itself as an offence, Elizabeth dissolved the boundary between life and spectacle. The Queen's body was both the ultimate stage and the final battleground. She ruled not only with sceptre and crown, but with the horror of her own artifice. A sovereign so terrified of decay that she demanded immortality of skin and spirit alike. Thus, disgusting rule number 5 stands revealed. Weakness is a crime. In its imperious shadow, every cough echoed like a knell, every wrinkle like a wound. The realm learned that to live under Elizabeth's command was to deny one's own humanity, for any sign of mortality would be met not with compassion but with condemnation. And in the endless hallways of slate and candlelight, the only sin was being alive enough to feel pain. Beneath the icy shadows of Queen Elizabeth I's palace, the 5 horrifying rules appear as an unbroken chain of invisible shackles, imprisoning the freedoms, affections, and very souls of the court. First, rule number 1. Marriage as a crime transformed the most sacred bond between two people into a capital offence. Anyone who dared to secretly exchange rings or vow loyalty without the Queen's written permission was deemed a traitor. Even Bess Throckmorton, a trusted lady-in-waiting, paid the price with imprisonment in the Tower of London, a punishment far harsher than any routine political sanction, simply for seeking happiness alongside Walter Raleigh. Next, rule number 2, absolute control of image and portrait, did not end with the face pattern that forced artists to conform to an exact template. It spiraled into a self-destructive cycle of toxic lead makeup. Each day, Elizabeth and her entire court applied a paste of lead and vinegar to their faces, necks and hands, inflicting skin damage, hair loss, and the necessity of elaborate wigs to conceal the aftermath. The palace became a diorama of poisonous beauty, where revealing even a single rough patch of skin or a strand of thinning hair threatened one's rank and freedom. Then came rule number 3. Love requires royal permission, which turned every lingering glance and intimate whisper into a punishable offence. Elizabeth did more than forbid marriage. She staged love as a cruel, social experiment, encouraging flirtation for her own amusement, before devastating those whose affections deepened. Whereas Bess suffered imprisonment, Lettice Knollys endured even greater humiliation. Stripped of all titles, exiled, and publicly slapped before the assembled court simply for marrying Robert Dudley. The court became a battlefield of romance, where trust fractured and suspicion reigned supreme. But Elizabeth did not stop there. Rule number 4. Religion is non-negotiable. Placed faith itself under the Queen's absolute dominion. As supreme governor of the Church of England, she compelled attendance at her prescribed rites and exact recitation of prayers, branding any deviation as treason. Her network of religious informants transformed neighbours into accusers and children into spies, while over 200 Roman Catholics were executed. The Church was reduced to an arm of the state, an administrative agency, where private belief had no refuge. Finally, rule number 5, weakness is a crime, capped the series of ghastly edicts with an absolute demand for eternal vitality. For 45 years, Elizabeth concealed every sign of exhaustion, illness, or aging beneath ever thicker layers of lead makeup and ever more elaborate wigs. Anyone who dared mention a wrinkle, a silver hair, or a missing tooth was deemed a criminal. She refused to name a successor, plunging England into political panic each time she fell ill. The final image of Elizabeth, a walking corpse draped in royal finery, stood as a grim testament to her transformation of death and decay into tools of control. Taken together, these 5 horrifying rules forged a political order that thrived not only on raw power but on harnessing fear to its utmost extent, turning love, beauty, faith, and even the human body into components of a living prison. Elizabeth I's court was not a stage for glorious triumphs, but a dark corridor, where every step, every smile, every breath was watched and constrained. In the somnolent pages of history, these 5 rules echo as a dire warning. Absolute power seizes every aspect of life, strips away every freedom, and enslaves humanity to the very illusion of its own sovereignty. And now, as the moon gently casts silver beams along the cold corridors of history, let us draw a deep, slow breath, release our shoulders, and allow the tales of the 5 horrifying rules to dissolve into the tranquil night. Amid the whispering wind, the images of thick lead makeup, motionless masks, and trembling, fearful hearts will gradually fade, leaving only the echo of an age-old but invaluable lesson. Absolute power always conceals a dreadful risk, and when people deny their own vulnerability, they become most vulnerable to ruthless oppression. The story of Queen Elizabeth I is not merely a sequence of royal tragedies, but a reminder to each of us that in our modern lives, compassion, freedom, and genuine love must always be cherished and protected. When we confront external pressures and rigid expectations, let us remember that weakness is not a crime, but rather a beautiful aspect of our human nature. Now, let your spirit rest, let your heart beat slow, and let those chilling visions slip away into darkness, making room for the gentle light of hope. Remember that even the longest night will yield to dawn, and within each of us lies the strength to overcome our fears and return to our true selves. With that message, we conclude tonight's journey with a soft, soothing whisper like a breeze scented with lavender. May your heart sparkle like a star in the sky, guiding you to sweet and peaceful dreams. Wishing you a night of restful sleep, filled with serenity and warmth. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you can continue to join us for fresh, captivating, and inspiring stories.